Some people spend 20 years waiting for a phone call. My father spent 20 years waiting for something much quieter. He spent 20 years waiting for a fishing rod to touch the water. I just didn't know it until it was almost too late. The fishing rod looked brand new. That was the first thing Nathan Brooks noticed. It sat inside an old aluminum boat tucked away beneath layers of dust in the corner of a garage that smelled faintly of cedar, wood, and motor oil. The rod still carried its faded price tag. The handle showed no signs of use. The fishing line had never been cast. For a long moment, Nathan simply stared at it. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the small Texas town where he had grown up. The familiar oak tree still stood in front of the house. The old mailbox still leaned slightly to one side. Everything seemed frozen in time, as though the last 20 years had somehow missed this place entirely. Nathan ran his fingers across the rod and felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He couldn't explain why. His father, William Brooks, had always loved fishing. The boat made sense. The tackle boxes made sense. The worn-out cooler sitting nearby made sense. But this fishing rod didn't. It looked like it had been purchased yesterday, not decades ago. He carefully set it back in place and climbed out of the boat. That was when his eyes landed on a blue storage box resting on the highest shelf of the garage. It was old, covered with a thin layer of dust, yet strangely well protected. Something about it pulled at him. Nathan dragged over a small ladder and reached for the box. It felt heavier than expected. When he carried it to the workbench and opened the lid, he froze. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, neatly stacked and arranged by year. The earliest one was dated 20 years ago. The latest had been written only weeks earlier. None of them had stamps. None of them had been mailed. Nathan picked up the first envelope. His name was written across the front in his father's careful handwriting. Suddenly, the fishing rod no longer seemed like the biggest mystery in the garage. With trembling hands, he opened the first letter and began to read, unaware that every page inside that box would change the way he understood his father, his family, and the life he thought he had built so far away from home. Nathan sat alone at the old workbench as the evening light slowly faded through the garage windows. The sounds of Cedar Creek drifted in from outside. A distant pickup truck rolled down the road. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. The world carried on as if nothing had changed. Yet everything felt different now. He unfolded the first letter carefully. The paper had yellowed with age, but his father's handwriting remained steady and familiar. October 2004. Nathan had been gone only a few months. William wrote about ordinary things. The weather. The oak tree losing its leaves. A high school football game in town. The neighbor finally repairing his fence. Simple things. Things Nathan would have considered unimportant back then. Yet as he read, he realized his father had not been writing about the town. He had been writing because he missed his son. Every sentence carried a quiet absence. William never complained. Never asked Nathan to come home. Never made him feel guilty. Instead, he wrote about keeping Nathan's bedroom exactly the same. The baseball trophies remained on the shelf. The faded movie posters still hung on the walls. Even the old desk stayed in its corner beneath the window. Nathan swallowed hard. He remembered calling home less and less during those years. Chicago had consumed him. New responsibilities. New opportunities. New ambitions. There was always another meeting. Another project. Another reason to postpone a visit. He opened the second letter. Then the third. The years passed one envelope at a time. In 2005, William proudly wrote that he had learned how to send emails because Nathan said phone calls were inconvenient during work hours. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. He vaguely remembered that conversation. He had spoken carelessly. His father had listened carefully. In 2007, William wrote about Thanksgiving dinner. He described Eleanor setting an extra plate at the table out of habit before quietly putting it away. Nathan stared at the page until the words blurred. He could almost see his mother standing in the kitchen. He could smell the turkey, hear the laughter he had missed. Outside the garage, darkness settled across the property. The porch light clicked on automatically. Nathan reached for another letter. This one was dated 2010. His father's handwriting looked slightly different. Less certain. The first sentence stopped him cold. Son, the doctors say everything is going to be fine, so there is no reason for you to worry. Nathan felt his chest tighten. He had no memory of this. No memory at all. Slowly, he continued reading and discovered that while he had been celebrating a promotion in Chicago, His father had been sitting alone in a hospital room hundreds of miles away. Nathan remained motionless as the letter rested in his hands. The garage suddenly felt smaller. The warm Texas air seemed heavier. He read the sentence again, hoping he had misunderstood it. But the words did not change. His father had been hospitalized. His father had gone through weeks of medical appointments. His father had faced uncertainty and fear, and Nathan had known nothing about it. He continued reading. William explained that the doctors were optimistic and that Eleanor had been by his side every day. He even joked about the hospital food. The letter never once asked Nathan to come home. It never suggested that his son should interrupt his career. Instead, William spent several paragraphs talking about Nathan's recent promotion. He wrote how proud he was, how he had shown the newspaper article about Nathan's company to nearly everyone in town. Nathan lowered the page and stared into the darkness outside the garage door. He remembered that year clearly. He remembered celebrating late into the night with coworkers overlooking the Chicago skyline. He remembered telling himself that he would visit home soon. Soon had turned into months, then years. He opened another letter, then another. The stack beside him slowly grew. Each envelope revealed moments of life that had continued without him. In one letter, William described repainting the front porch. In another, he wrote about Eleanor winning first place at the county fair for her apple pie. There were stories about neighbors, church picnics, and small-town traditions Nathan had once known by heart. None of them seemed important when viewed from a 48th floor office in Chicago. Yet now they felt priceless. Then he reached a letter dated December 2012. Nathan unfolded it carefully. William wrote about Christmas preparations. Eleanor had spent an entire afternoon baking Nathan's favorite apple pie recipe. She knew he was not coming home that year. They both knew. Yet she baked it anyway. She wrapped gifts anyway. She hung his stocking anyway. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He pictured his mother standing alone in the kitchen, flour dusting the counter, the smell of cinnamon filling the house. Waiting, not expecting, just hoping. The realization hurt more than he expected. Not because his parents had blamed him. They never had. It hurt because they had loved him without conditions, without complaints, without keeping score. Nathan reached for the next envelope. The date on the front stopped him. 2015. For reasons he could not explain, a sense of unease settled over him. He slowly opened the letter, unaware that what he was about to discover would reveal a sacrifice he never knew his father had made. Nathan unfolded the letter slowly. The paper felt more fragile than the others, as though time itself had settled into its fibers. He began reading. At first, the words seemed ordinary. William talked about the unusually warm spring that year. He mentioned a fishing tournament at Lake Travis and a church fundraiser downtown. Then Nathan reached the middle of the page, and his breath caught. William wrote that he had sold the 1968 Mustang. Nathan stared at the sentence. The Mustang had always been his father's pride and joy. Bright blue, immaculately maintained. Every Saturday morning, William would spend hours polishing it in the driveway. Nathan remembered sitting in the passenger seat as a boy, listening to old country songs on the radio while his father drove through the Texas countryside. Selling that car would have been unthinkable, yet the letter explained everything. A few months earlier, Nathan's startup investment had collapsed. He had nearly lost everything he had spent years building. The crisis had terrified him. He remembered the sleepless nights, the emergency loans, the uncertainty. What he did not remember was telling his parents how serious the situation had become. Somehow, William had figured it out anyway. The letter never used the word sacrifice. William simply wrote that some things mattered more than cars. He wrote that dreams deserved a chance. He wrote that fathers were supposed to help when they could. Nathan felt tears gathering in his eyes. The money that had appeared in his account during that difficult year had come through an anonymous financial arrangement. He had spent years wondering where it came from. He had assumed it was a private investor who preferred to remain hidden. Now he knew the truth. His father had quietly given up something he loved so that his son could keep moving forward. And he had never told anyone. Nathan lowered the letter and covered his eyes with one hand. The silence around him felt overwhelming. Through the open garage door, he could see the porch light glowing softly against the evening darkness. Inside the house, Eleanor was probably preparing dinner while William rested after leaving the hospital. Life continued as usual, yet Nathan felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. For years, he had measured success through promotions, contracts, and bank accounts. Sitting in that garage, none of those things seemed important. He reached for the next letter. The date read 2021. Before opening it, he noticed something different. The handwriting looked less steady than before. The letters wandered slightly across the page. A quiet feeling of concern settled inside him as he carefully broke the seal and began to read. Nathan read the first few lines slowly. The change in William's handwriting became impossible to ignore. Some words leaned unevenly across the page. Certain letters appeared hesitant, as though they had required extra effort. Yet the tone remained familiar. Calm, warm, uncomplaining. William wrote about small things at first. The tomatoes growing behind the house. A new pastor joining the church. Eleanor insisting on feeding half the neighborhood whenever she baked too much. Nathan smiled faintly. He could hear his father's voice in every sentence. Then the letter shifted. William admitted that he had started forgetting little things. Not important things, he assured himself. Just names here and there. A misplaced tool. A missed appointment written on the wrong day of the calendar. Nathan felt a knot form in his stomach. William treated the subject lightly, almost as if he were reassuring his son instead of himself. He joked that growing older was simply another way of collecting stories. But beneath the humor, Nathan sensed something else. A quiet fear. A fear his father had never spoken aloud. He continued reading. William described standing in the garage one afternoon and suddenly forgetting why he had walked in there. He laughed about it in the letter. Then he mentioned finding an old photograph of Nathan as a teenager holding a fishing rod beside Lake Travis. He wrote that seeing the picture brought everything back instantly. The memory had returned so clearly that he could almost hear his son's laughter echoing across the water. Nathan stared at the page. The words seemed heavier now, more personal, more fragile. Then he reached the final paragraph. His father wrote that aging itself did not frighten him. Neither did gray hair. Neither did retirement. Neither did the passing years. What frightened him most was the possibility of losing the details that mattered. The sound of Eleanor humming while she baked. The smell of cedar after a summer rain. The memory of his son running across the front yard as a boy. Nathan's chest tightened. He continued reading. William confessed that sometimes he worried a day might come when he could no longer remember Nathan's voice clearly. Not because his son had done anything wrong. Not because of distance. Simply because time moved quietly and never stopped moving. Nathan lowered the letter and stared into the darkness beyond the garage. For several minutes, he could not move. The realization settled deep inside him. His father had spent years protecting him from worry while carrying worries of his own. Slowly, Nathan reached for the next envelope. It was the most recent one in the box. The date on the front was only weeks old. His father's final letter waited inside. For a long time, Nathan simply stared at the final envelope. The garage had become completely quiet. Even the sounds from the road outside seemed distant now. He turned the envelope over in his hands before carefully opening it. The paper inside was folded neatly, but the handwriting immediately caught his attention. William's letters had always been steady, confident, strong. This one was different. The lines trembled slightly. Certain words appeared darker, as though the pen had paused longer than usual. Nathan took a slow breath and began reading. His father started by writing about an ordinary Tuesday morning. Eleanor had made pancakes. The weather had been pleasant. The oak tree out front was beginning to lose a few leaves. The familiar details made Nathan smile sadly. Then the letter shifted. William wrote that age had taught him something important. Most people spend their lives believing they have more time. More weekends. More holidays. More chances to make the phone call tomorrow. More opportunities to keep promises later. Yet later had a way of arriving faster than expected. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He continued reading. William admitted there was one memory that had stayed with him for more than 20 years. Before Nathan left Texas for Chicago, they had planned a fishing trip together at Lake Travis. Nothing elaborate. Just a father and son spending a weekend on the water before life pulled them in different directions. William wrote that he had purchased a brand new fishing rod specifically for that trip. He had imagined teaching Nathan a few final tricks before he left home. But work had interfered. Then school. Then careers. Then years. The trip never happened. The next paragraph made Nathan stop breathing for a moment. William revealed that the old boat was still sitting in the garage. He had never sold it. Not because it was valuable. Not because he used it often. He kept it because part of him always believed there would still be time. Time for one more fishing trip. One more conversation. One more chance to finish what they started. Nathan lowered the page. His eyes moved toward the boat, sitting quietly in the corner of the garage. Suddenly everything made sense. The untouched fishing rod. The careful storage. The years of waiting. He looked back at the letter and read the final lines. William wrote that if Nathan was reading this, then perhaps life had finally slowed down long enough for him to notice what truly mattered. Nathan sat motionless as tears filled his eyes. Then he folded the letter carefully, stood from the workbench, and slowly walked toward the boat. Nathan stopped beside the boat and rested one hand on its weathered edge. The aluminum felt cool beneath his fingertips. For years, he had walked through airports, conference centers, and luxury hotels without ever thinking about this boat. Yet now it seemed more important than any boardroom he had ever entered. Slowly, he climbed inside. Dust covered the seats. A faded life jacket rested beneath one bench. An old tackle box sat exactly where his father had left it. Everything carried the quiet evidence of waiting. Then Nathan saw them. 2 fishing rods. One was familiar. The handle was worn smooth from years of use. The other stood beside it, untouched by time except for a thin layer of dust. The same rod his father had described in the final letter. The same rod purchased for a trip that never happened. Nathan carefully lifted it from its holder. The price tag still hung from the reel. The line had never touched water. The cork handle looked exactly as it must have looked 20 years earlier when William carried it home from the sporting goods store. Nathan swallowed hard. He imagined his father placing it inside the boat all those years ago. He imagined him believing the trip would happen next month, then next summer, then next year. Life had kept moving, yet the fishing rod had remained, waiting, just like the room inside the house, just like the empty chair at holiday dinners, just like the stack of letters hidden inside the blue box. Nathan lowered himself onto one of the seats and sat quietly. For the first time in years, there were no emails demanding attention. No investors expecting answers. No meetings on the calendar. Only silence. Only memory. Through the open garage door, he could see the lights glowing inside the house. His parents were there. Not in old photographs. Not in distant memories. They were still here. Still waiting for ordinary moments that he had convinced himself could always happen later. Nathan looked down at the unused fishing rod resting across his knees. A realization settled over him with complete clarity. The greatest mistake of his life was not working too hard. It was believing that the people he loved would always be there when he finally found time for them. He remained in the boat for a long while before carefully returning the rod to its place. Then he picked up the blue box, carried it toward the house, and made a decision that would change everything about the future he had planned for himself. 3 days later, before sunrise painted the Texas sky, Nathan quietly knocked on his parents' bedroom door. William opened it wearing an old flannel shirt and a puzzled expression. Nathan handed him a jacket. "Come with me," he said. William looked at him for a moment, but asked no questions. An hour later, they were driving through the rolling hills toward Lake Travis. The familiar road stretched ahead beneath the pale morning light. Neither man spoke much during the drive. They did not need to. Some conversations had already happened inside letters. Some answers had already been waiting for years. When they arrived at the marina, William stopped walking. The old boat sat beside the dock. Cleaned, fueled, ready for the water. Nathan had spent the previous 2 days restoring it. He had washed away years of dust and checked every bolt and cable. William stared at it quietly. His eyes moved from the boat to his son and back again. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Then William smiled. It was a small smile, but Nathan had not seen one quite like it in years. The lake was calm as glass when they pushed away from shore. The rising sun scattered gold across the water. Birds drifted overhead. The air smelled of cedar and fresh water. Nathan felt something inside him settle for the first time in a very long while. Out in the middle of the lake, he cut the engine. Silence surrounded them. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. The kind that only existed far from schedules and deadlines. Nathan opened the tackle compartment and removed 2 fishing rods. One carried the marks of decades of use. The other still looked nearly new despite the years. He handed the older rod to William. Then he kept the untouched one for himself. William looked at the newer rod and immediately understood. His eyes remained fixed on it for several seconds. Nathan noticed the emotion gathering there. No explanation was necessary. No apology could have expressed more than this moment already had. Slowly, Nathan attached the line and prepared the rod exactly as it should have been prepared 20 years earlier. Then, for the first time since it left the sporting goods store, the line arced through the morning air and settled gently onto the surface of Lake Travis. The water rippled outward in small circles. William watched quietly. Nathan looked across the lake and realized that some promises never truly disappear. They simply wait for someone brave enough to return and finish them. That fishing trip became the beginning of something neither Nathan nor William had expected. Nathan returned to Chicago after a few weeks, but something inside him had changed. The city looked the same. The office looked the same. The meetings continued. Yet for the first time in 20 years, he began measuring success differently. He stopped postponing visits home. He stopped treating family as something that could always wait until next month. Every few weeks, he found himself back in Texas. Sometimes he and William spent an afternoon on Lake Travis. Sometimes they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky above the oak tree. Sometimes they said very little at all. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Eleanor seemed happier too. She baked her apple pies. She filled the house with laughter. She stopped hiding her excitement whenever Nathan called to say he was coming home. Seasons passed. Spring became summer. Summer became autumn. The years no longer rushed by unnoticed. Nathan learned that ordinary days were not ordinary at all. They were the moments people remembered most when they were gone. 1 year after the morning on the lake, William passed away peacefully in his sleep. The sadness was real. The loss was deep. Yet alongside the grief, Nathan carried something unexpected. Gratitude. There were no unfinished promises left between them. No words trapped inside unopened letters. No fishing trip waiting for another year. The most important things had finally been done. Years later, Nathan still returned to Lake Travis every spring. The old boat remained carefully maintained. The blue box rested safely inside a storage compartment beneath the seat. The 20 letters were still there. So were the 2 fishing rods. One worn smooth by time and use. The other no longer untouched. Every year Nathan cast that line into the water and watched the ripples spread across the lake. He often thought about the path that had brought him back. People liked to say that home was a place, a town, a house, a point on a map. But Nathan knew better now. Home was not the distance between Chicago and Texas. Home was every promise we choose to keep. Every person we choose to make time for. Every moment we stop postponing until tomorrow. Because the lesson his father had spent 20 years trying to teach him was simple. We always believe there will be more time. Until one day we realized that time was the one thing quietly slipping away all along.